There's no such thing as a black Bond. It's just, are we interested in having a Bond character other than being a male?
I found out that Daniel Craig no longer wanted to be James Bond. I was heartbroken.
It could be a woman, it could be a black woman, it could be a white woman. But, you know, I think that character, everybody would like to see it have, you know, do something different with it. Why not?
Until I heard that at the top of the list, the potential replacement was a man by the name Idris Elba.
I thought I'd throw my hat into the ring. Or my ring into the hat. It was much cooler in my head.
You know, James Bond is white, so I wanted to make a character, a superhero, for black actors way beyond my time.
Okay, so today's episode will be on James Bond, a black James Bond. Is it a good idea? Is it a terrible idea? As you can tell from the title, I'm not a fan of it. However, we're going to discuss it. And I want to just say this now to manage expectations.
No, I'm not a racist. I am the least racist person you have ever interviewed. That I can tell you.
To kind of put it in its proper context, this is in no way an attack on blackness or actors and directors that could potentially line up to become the next James Bond director or actor. It's more to analyze the environment, the circumstances in which a black James Bond could happen, and if it would work out and be beneficial not only for the character, but for race relations, race debates, and the actor's profile, the director's profile. We're going to go into different aspects of this debate and see, is this the best circumstance to have these conversations? And if not, why? But before we get into that, I'm going to need you to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Share this channel, like this channel, engage with this channel. I'm going to need your support in order to grow it. I really believe I can grow it. I really believe that we can turn this into something magical. In order to do that, I'm going to need your support. So please support a brother out. So it's important when discussing James Bond, a black James Bond, to look at who created James Bond, and that's Ian Fleming.
Mr. Fleming, how does an author tackle the problem of selecting a name for the hero of his stories?
Well, it isn't only the hero. I mean, I generally pick up names just driving through the countryside, through villages and so on. You'll see an interesting name over a tobacconist or chemist or something of that sort in any country in the world. But when I started to write these books in 1952, I wanted to find a name which wouldn't have any of this romantic overtones like Peregrine Carruthers or whatever it might be. I wanted a really flat, quiet name. And one of my Bibles out here is James Bond's Birds of the West Indies.
Ian Fleming was a former war veteran in the 1940s, and he created James Bond out of a sort of personal and observational need for escapism, and he created this idealistic, hegemonic form of masculinity that was James Bond. Not only using James Bond as a form and symbol of masculinity, a symbol of strength, a symbol of power, a symbol of escapism, but also used him as a way and as a monolith in which people should model their lives in some ways and in some ways not, in the case of his overt sexualization of women.
They are the books of an old rake. I mean, the titles are outrageous. Think of Pussy Galore, that's sheer obscenity. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Did I say, William?
Yes, James. James, you're hurting
I'll
me.
do worse than that if you don't tell me. You're doing this under orders, I know. What are they?
I don't know what you mean.
Liar. Felix! Felix, how are you? Dink, meet Felix Leiter.
Hello.
Felix, say hello to Dink.
Hi, Dink.
Dink, say goodbye to Felix. Man talk.
Birthed out of a different time, and you can kind of forgive some of the shortcomings of how women were objectified in the earlier movies, especially some of the names. Octopussy, really? It goes without saying that James Bond is a quintessential white middle-class character who is supposed to project what some people may discern as white privilege, others may discern as just pure escapism.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's no way around this. This is white privilege.
Birthed out of Ian Fleming's own encounters of the real James Bond.
Although Fleming never admitted that Yugoslavian double agent Duško Popov was his primary source of inspiration, there's plenty of evidence that this was the case. It's also believed that MI6 would never have allowed him to disclose this information in his lifetime. But today, we are going to tell you the fascinating story of the real-life James Bond. So, let's get started. Life of a double agent. In February 1940, he was practicing law back in his hometown when he received a message that his friend Jebsen wanted to meet with him. Jebsen had joined the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, and he was tasked with recruiting people to act as spies. Popov was torn because he knew his best friend needed him, but he also despised the Nazis. He quickly saw that this was actually a perfect opportunity to infiltrate the Nazis. He agreed to act as a German spy, and then almost immediately went to the British intelligence and offered his services as a double agent. Before long, Popov was simultaneously Britain's greatest secret agent and Germany's greatest secret agent. Popov's Casino Royale. In August 1941, Popov received the payment of $38,000, worth roughly $650,000 at today's valuation. And rather than hide it or secure it in a safe, he decided to keep the money on him as he enjoyed a night at the Casino Estoril, one of the largest casinos in Europe. Fleming followed close behind without interacting with Popov in order to fulfill his duty of keeping an eye on the money. But he ended up studying Popov instead. At the casino, Popov was playing at the baccarat table when a cocky Lithuanian businessman announced he would match any amount someone bet at his table. Popov didn't like his attitude and wanted to teach him a lesson, so he pulled out all of the money that was going to MI6 and bet it all on a single hand of baccarat to call the man's bluff. The crowd went quiet, stunned at the massive amount of cash he laid out on the table. Fleming had reportedly turned green at the thought that Popov was putting at risk the very money he had been tasked to protect. After a tense moment, the flustered Lithuanian withdrew his claim and Popov cheerfully gathered the money off the table while telling the casino head that they shouldn't allow such irresponsible gamblers at their tables. This scene that Fleming witnessed is said to have inspired a similar casino scene in his book, Casino Royale. But more than that, Fleming appears to have largely based the entire character of James Bond on Duško Popov. How Popov compares to Bond. How Fleming describes Bond in his book perfectly mirrors how Duško was in real life. Just like Bond, he had dark hair, combed straight back, and blue-gray eyes. He spoke 5 different languages, was clean-shaven, had won 2 shooting contests, was very athletic, and he was known to be a womanizer. He was cultured and could fit into any setting, and wasn't afraid of danger. In fact, he sought it out.
Popov? Can't really pronounce his name, but this former spy birthed many of the characteristics and traits on which James Bond was modeled by. And one of the key traits which I believe made James Bond who he is and made Popov who he is was one thing. Have a guess.
He was cultured and could fit into any setting.
And if your guess was white, you would be wrong. But kind of right at the same time. It was blending in. The ability to blend in, that was Popov's great trait. That's James Bond's great trait. And that is not a black man in Russia who's looking for love. I will be referencing many James Bond movies throughout this. I did some research into it. That is sort of where some of my critiques birthed from, where what makes and the roots of James Bond, who he is, what it is, for better and for worse. When you race swap the character or even gender swap the character, you risk potentially losing what the character was, creating a space and an environment where the character becomes something other than what it is. The film, the stories are removed from their places in great storytelling and great cinema and become something other than that. They become political statements. Even in your watching of the movie or not watching of the movie, in of itself is a political statement. An example of this is The Little Mermaid.
Nature, which is why when I see this, I instantly think, all right, this isn't about they casted the best person. This is about they're trying to be the most woke.
You know why I don't like Ariel's changing skin tone? It's not because I'm a raucous. It's not that I think these types of mermaids are unrealistic. And it's not even because I think black people should get their own original characters instead of hand-me-downs, though that is true. It's because when you get past all the nitty-gritty, it's a distracting change that will take away from the experience.
To have someone with darker skin who lives deep in the ocean. I mean, if anything, not only should the Little Mermaid be pale, she should actually be translucent.
If you're not going to take this seriously, then we're not going to. And we're just going to troll the hell out of you at this point.
I say we remake a couple of other classics, this time using an all-white cast. I say we remake Ruth.
The Little Mermaid was not only race swapped by Hailey Bailey, who was a prominent up-and-coming actress, I should say, at the time, which you would think in the back of your mind, oh, this would do well, Disney's on a roll. However, that race swapping was such a big deal for, I don't want to say racist, but let's say nostalgialists, that it caused the film to not bomb, but not do as well as it should have done. That was, to me, $1 billion film in the making, if done right, and unfortunately, barely recoup its budget and marketing budget if you include those numbers in it. And it comes at the very heart of one of my big problems with a black James Bond, and when you race swap iconic white characters, is that blackness, and by that trait of race swapping them, you are saying that blackness isn't political, and blackness is political. To be black is a political statement. To identify as black is a political statement. To race swap James Bond in of itself is a political statement. Now, I have no problem with black espionage and making black actors prominent leads in tentpole films, and you will see throughout this episode that that's not where this is going. And if you've watched any of my previous stuff, I don't believe in that at all anyway. But when you see James Bond and you view James Bond, he's a quintessential British character, and to race swap it and to assume that it would do justice to the character and it wouldn't create a debate that would force and potentially undercut not only the actor and the director but the story itself is somewhat naive. And it's that colorblind casting that really prolificates and pushes racism further and further and further to the forefront.
To have someone with darker skin who lives deep in the ocean. I mean, if anything, not only should the Little Mermaid be pale, she should actually be translucent.
If you're not going to take this seriously, then we're not going to.
Did you know many people in Jamaica not only believe in mermaids, but have said to have seen them? One spot in particular is Jamaica's Flat Bridge. Not only that, Flat Bridge was made long ago by enslaved people, and during its construction, many lost their lives, and are also said to haunt the area alongside the mermaids. On top of all of this, there have been a high number of fatal incidents with people and vehicles, which add another layer of unusual accounts on the bridge. People say that when the river beneath Flat Bridge turns green, bad things are likely to happen. At times, it's believed the spirits or mermaids are responsible for incidents and people going missing. So sometimes animal blood and rum is poured into the river to attempt to appease them. Some of the locals in the surrounding islands also claim to have first-hand accounts with mermaids. Accounts ranging from them being monsters, tricksters, you can strike deals with them, some of them being beautiful, benevolent, or also being behind disappearances.
And I do believe when you are turning fictional stories into cinematic or TV series, the most important thing is to keep the character as true to the writer's description and belief and the roots of the character. And if you look at the roots, as we've discussed a little earlier, of James Bond, him being white is a key prominent factor. I cannot imagine Idris Elba running around Russia, or whether that be Ukraine, or whether that be in Goldfinger, or he could probably have done something in Her Majesty's Secret Service that would have banged, and even a Casino Royale. But generally speaking, you can see the problems and the shortcomings of that on a large scale. And if you have to pose yourself this question, if a black James Bond was to happen, let's look at it from this way. If they didn't discuss race in the film, you would have many critics arguing, how do you have a black man in MI6, the first black James Bond, and race isn't discussed?
Hey, you're a racist now, father!
And if you did discuss it, you would have people on the right side saying, why is James Bond a quintessential white character who is about escapism, fun, and adventure, discussing race?
There was a place where we could go on Sunday in the fall and kind of get away from politics for 3 or 4 hours, and that's how most people feel about it.
Keep race out of my movies. At least my movies about escapism. And it does a disservice to the actors, and you can see it's put off many people, to the point where it looks like Aaron Taylor-Johnson is the bookie's favourite. Potentially, not only the bookie's favourite, but maybe an insider information has been leaked that he is the favourite. They're just waiting to announce it. However, that's not why I created this. It really bursts at the heart of one of my biggest problems with this kind of debate. When you talk about race swapping of iconic characters, it leads to this.
What else do we have to strive for outside of white validation? Black excellence still seeks white validation.
You need for black excellence to be validated through white ideals of success. In this example, the idea of success is a tentpole franchise that has been pushed for many years as a part of Britannia in James Bond. In other cases, it could be the presidency. In other cases, it can be being a part of a DCU, MCU cinematic universe. In any case, you can see that its connection to white establishment power structures is when black excellence is most validated. And although that is a great thing and a great achievement, Santel Joseph argues that black excellence far too often needs its validations, and it hinges its validations on its ideas of white success. And you can see here the people and the different characters that they name. Obama is an example of black excellence in a historical white structure and white power structure. I mean, the United States in of itself is maybe the face of white supremacy. Maybe, I don't want to go too far, maybe. The presidency is the face of the United States. And Obama becoming president was a shining, glorifying moment.
So in love with you. This is your victory.
Please don't bring up Obama, because Obama was the biggest disappointment
Really?
to Black America and
No
also
way.
Kenya as well.
No
Yes.
way.
Yes.
Barack Obama being president. But Barack Obama is a joke. Barack Obama didn't do a darn thing for black folk.
Which became about what? Race. I mean, in short part, because Obama used race and hope as a way to build an uproar and a siege mentality for him to gain votes. In another case, it did much to undercut some of the good things he does. In my opinion, Obama was more of a kind of president.
Excited little man.
In other ways, Obama's presidency became more about what he wasn't doing for the black community, using that as a way to attack him and tear him down by the right side and lose black interest and black votes and ethnic minority votes than his actual general policies, which again were kind of
That everything is going to change forever.
more of the capitalist structure that was to be. However, I use that as an example to explain some of what could happen and the tensions that could be created if you turn a James Bond into a black figure, a black James Bond. What happened to Obama? I think something very similar would happen to the actor and director that would potentially take over a James Bond film. You've seen it with The Little Mermaid and Hailey Bailey and some of the attacks that she unfairly got. And you see that with President Obama, that potentially could happen to a black James Bond. And I want to add this, that a director I believe that could do an amazing job of directing a James Bond film is Christopher Nolan. Is probably the premier action director, especially from Britain anyway, with his creativity with films like Tenet, Inception, Interstellar, and his recent Oscar-winning directing role in Oppenheimer. He is the premier director, and if you want to see an example of what a potential James Bond film would look like under Christopher Nolan, look no further than Tenet. He's also led tentpole franchises like The Dark Knight, the Batman series. Fantastic. Now imagine him under the guise of this racial debate. He's not the guy for it, by the way, in terms of the racial debate.
Wait a minute. I'm white.
And having that potential film undercut by this discussion about should a black James Bond or should a James Bond be black? I think it removes a lot from the movie, and I would argue that there are many examples of when that has ruined and stolen away from those films. As I was saying earlier, the example of Barack Obama illustrates how these magisterial and black excellent moments can often be hijacked by racist or just sometimes inquisitive minds about racial dynamics and what this means, and sometimes far too often that the meaning of it and the symbolism of it is removed from the actuality of it, i.e. Obama's presence.
Ivorian Beats.
However, I know there's an elephant in the room. I know there's a moment that people are thinking about, well, there's been loads of big action tentpole films with historically white cast, i.e. Black Panther. Now, Black Panther is an amazing example of this for a number of reasons, because Stan Lee's own vision of Black Panther was
You're talking about the 60s when all this was happening. There was a lot of social issues being just blown in your face. The media was all about it. Stan was a showman. Stan was P.T. Barnum in comics. So ultimately, I think he went, this is going to grab attention. This is going to light up, and he went for it. It was easy for him collaborating with other artists like, Jack Kirby and so forth. But also it was easier for people to come in with an idea about a character who was not white, blonde-haired, blue eyes, and Stan would go, well, okay, what do we do now? What's the story? What's the idea? And they would spitball things. And that was Stan's energy. If you could get him excited about it, he would run with it and damn the torpedoes sort of thing. And whether he did it for purely social commentary reasons or to be a good guy, to be a hero himself, to be the leader of a movement, I don't know. But what you look at is what he enabled to occur. Black comic strip characters back in the 50s. A lot of the norms were changing by the time I hit my teen years. And yeah, to start to see Luke Cage, Black Panther, Gabe, these characters there, whoa, people want to see themselves represented in their mythology. They want to enjoy that, and they want to know that the fantasies about what I'd love to be able to do or what my kids would like to be able to do is represented out there in the world.
And that to me illustrates so much of what Black Panther was about. Black Panther in its inception is about race relations, inclusion. The fact that Black Panther's power set is so overwhelmingly powerful, sort of a Gary Stu. Gary Stu is an example of this. You can see he's supposed to be Black Panther in of itself, a symbol, an ideal for black people to achieve and aspire to. Wakanda itself is a fantasy that black people and black communities and ethnic minority communities in general should achieve and want to aspire to. It's in the very inception and its insurrection into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Avengers team in general was to do with inclusion. Now I understand, maybe you do that with a James Bond, but wouldn't that take away from what James Bond is? Escapism. And although there's some elements of a black James Bond that would be escapism and a Black Panther film that is escapism, I do think for the most part it would be riddled by race debates. It's so much so that the controversy around the first Black Panther, which was the best one by far, was its conclusion to the Killmonger and T'Challa debate.
Where is this one from?
The Bobo Ashanti tribe, present-day Ghana, 19th century.
For real? And what about this one?
That one's from the Edo people of Benin, 16th century.
Now, tell me about this one.
Also from Benin, 7th century, Fula tribe, I believe.
Nah.
I beg your pardon.
It was taken by British soldiers in Benin, but it's from Wakanda, and it's made out of vibranium. Don't trip. I'm gonna take it off your hands for you.
These items aren't for sale.
How do you think your ancestors got these? You think they paid a fair price? Or did they take it like they took everything else?
Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
You got all this security in here watching me ever since I walked in, but you ain't checking for what you put in your body.
All right, mate, let's have it. Come on, mate, time.
I think she might not be feeling too good.
Whether T'Challa was right, whether Killmonger was right, many people in black communities actually argue that Killmonger was right. I do believe Killmonger's view was too extreme to work on a mass scale. However, imagine a James Bond film being bogged down by that debate. That's not what James Bond is about. If you want that, don't go to James Bond. This harps at one of my biggest points about James Bond and about a black James Bond and race swapping, gender swapping in general that I find really frustrating. And it kind of does arc back to this one point that too often that black excellence needs the validation of white successes, white success systems in order to feel that it is at the table. Leading a black James Bond film, a black man being a part and leading a black James Bond does not validate a black man's ability to lead a tentpole franchise. It doesn't at all, because there are loads of great black stories that could do that job without you trying to race swap James Bond.
Caribbean folklore creatures, and
welcome to the mystical realm of African mythical creatures, from fearsome beasts like the Kongamato to benevolent spirits like Yangu.
The mythology, the folklore that is living and bubbling to the surface and coming out in things like The Woman King in African and Caribbean diasporas is ready to take over with its beautiful, lush, exotic characters and monsters and creatures and lore. It is ready for the big screen. We don't need to race swap anymore. Woman King is an example of it not only being cinematically viable, but financially viable. And I get that how the Dahomey tribe was depicted has its own issues. However, that will happen with any tentpole story that you bring to the forefront of cinema. Things are cut out, things are skimmed over to make a homogenized story. Problematic, however, we don't want to wokeism James Bond, and we don't want to wokeism these black stories either. However, they are ready to take the forefront. Now, if you look at some of the detective stories from Alexander McCall, where he wrote The Woman That Walked in the Sunshine, which is based off his all-ladies detective agency. Again, Alex McCall is a white man who wrote it, but this story is full of twists, turns, and a moving plot that would be not only great for a big screen adaptation, but also a TV series. If you want to move away from the detective aspect and go into the fantasy realm, there's A Song of Wrath and Ruin, a fantastic book written by Rosianne, who is a Ghanaian writer, story that is based in the Ashanti tribe's lore and mythology of gods and witchcraft. And depending how far down the route you want to go, there are different stories. You've got The Orange Boy by Patrice Lawrence, Dread Nation, Blood Debts, The Upper World, Down the River, Upon the Sea. We also have Nello Hopkins, The Brown Girl with the Ring, which mixes in contemporary and Caribbean folklore into one moving, beautiful plot. And if you notice, these stories that I've told and these books that you would have seen on screen, they are filled to the brink with women, male, different sorts of characters. One thing about African and Caribbean society is that they were as much patriarchal and as matriarchal. And I'm not doing this to play into some female audience. I, for one, love patriarchy.
You guys are clearly not doing patriarchy very well.
No, no, we're doing it well. Yeah, we just hide it better now.
Oh.
Just kidding. But there are beautiful stories to be told from a matriarchal standpoint, from a patriarchal standpoint, male and female. They're full of it, they're rich with it, and we need to get to telling it. We don't need to race and gender swap too much, especially with these iconic characters when there are so many enriching stories to be told. And I really do think sometimes when we go down this route of race and gender swapping these characters, we can end up kind of playing into the ideas of colonialism in some way that our validation only can happen, like I've been saying, under white success. And I just want to add this and indulge me for a second. There are so many great stories to be told, especially in the place of Caribbean folklore, which I get African folklore is still underrepresented and undercovered, but Caribbean folklore is pretty much barren in terms of the cinematic adaptations. I mean, African folklore is close to barren, but Caribbean folklore is completely missed out, and it has some amazing folklore to it.
But I want to talk about Mama Dulu, which I know is actually very common with a lot of other cultures. So as her name suggests, Mama Dulu means mother of the water. So kind of like how Papa was the protector of the forest, she's the protector of the river and all its creatures. So people usually say that they are married. So she's usually portrayed as a hideous creature that is half woman, half snake, so the bottom part of her body is like an anaconda and the top is usually naked and all of that. However, she commonly takes on the shape of a beautiful woman sitting at the river edge, combing her hair with this golden comb and all of that. But when you get her vexed, she usually takes on this form, which is the hideous, full body snake type version of her. And that's when she's threatening you. So if you come here to hunt or fish or you damage the river, put some oil in it, throw some garbage in it, anything, Mama Dulu will now turn into this, and then after she will make you get married to her for this life and the next one.
Papa Bois, guardian of the forest. Deep in the heart of the dense forests of Trinidad, and there exists a mystical folklore character known as Papa Bois. Revered as the protector of the forests and its inhabitants, this enigmatic figure, also nicknamed Daddy Buchan or Father Wood in the local patois, holds an intriguing legend.
Okay, so we're back at it again with another video, but today we're going to talk about the Sukunya, as you can see here. So the Sukunya is basically an old lady who is a shapeshifter. So at night she will wait until the sun go down, obviously, and then she will take her skin off and turn into a ball of fire. When she take off her skin, she's usually put in a mortar or pestle, or some people say they put it in like tree trunks or something like that. So once she turns into this ball of fire, she usually goes around the village, neighborhood, or whatever, go through your windows and stuff like that, and will suck your blood. And when she suck your blood, you will know because it's usually a mark like this. We call it black and blues. I know you always call it some different kind of bruises, but you'll usually know if you have a black and blue that you can't explain. It'll be like, you get a Sukunya bite. So typically if you want to get rid of a Sukunya or you're trying to not get a bite that night, you'll have to put some rice outside your window because she had to count every rice grain before she gets into your house. Or you gotta find where she put her skin and put some salt on it, which will make her unable to put the skin back on, and then the sun come up and she dead.
There are loads of stories and different tellings of this folklore that needs to be discovered, and I hope you can see from those TikToks how enriching and how vibrant they are. And also this harking back to the Little Mermaid point, it's unfortunate in order to validate black women in cinema further, they had to put Hailey Bailey in this tentpole Little Mermaid Disney picture, and it is a big massive move. However, its failure might be harped on more going forward than anything else, and it kind of removes from the fact that really and truly there were some great mermaid stories to be told in the Caribbean diaspora and Caribbean folklore, which would have done more not only to promote the actress, but the community at large. Really, when you look at The Little Mermaid and Hailey Bailey's performance in there, it did more to bring attention to Disney. And it didn't really benefit race relations at all. And again, I hark back to my original point. I think that's what would happen with James Bond. And there are so many black female characters that could be covered in this. If you take the Moors, if you remember, the Moors have traveled all over Europe. First female Moors were discovered in Valencia, allegedly.
Of Amazons or women warriors has always stimulated the imagination, especially of men. In general, women all across the globe did participate in battle, but legends of Amazonian warriors are clear exaggerations. So, with the existence of Christian and Muslim sources talking about black women warriors in the battle for Valencia, to what extent can that really be relied on? Today, I'll be speaking about one scholar's argument who believes that the accounts of black women warriors in Spain must be taken seriously. Elena establishes the fact that Tuareg warriors never used the bow as a weapon. When the Tuareg and even other Senhaja Amazigh warriors needed archers, they conscripted African soldiers from further south, many of whom were known for their skill in it. One of the more interesting points that Professor Elena makes is not even in relation to any contradictory details. It concerns the nature of men and embellishment of history to boast about the reputation of a highly favored ruler. The Cid was highly respected and honored in Spain for his military exploits against the Moors, and thus, why would any European chronicler feel the need to use the defeat of black women to enhance his image as a hero?
And I believe there's a great story to be told there. Whether it's true or false can be covered in the film. However, when you see the success of Woman King, you could see it there. And it doesn't just stop there. You've got the Moors in general, their story, their pilgrimages in and around Europe and the Middle East. You have loads of mythological characters from the African diaspora.
Chance to win. Now, onto the ferocious mythical creatures from Africa. Number 1, the were hyena. Perhaps the most famous mythical creature from African mythology is the were hyena, a creature similar but very different to the famous werewolf. Just as the werewolf transforms from human to wolf, the were hyena transforms from human into hyena. But that's where the differences end. A were hyena can also be a hyena that transforms into a human. Thus, in most myths, were hyenas are able to transform at any time and don't need access to a full moon. Grootslang is a legendary creature said to dwell in a deep cave called the Wonder Hole or the Bottomless Pit in Richardsveld, South Africa. The Grootslang is said to take the form of a humongous serpent with the head of an elephant with great fangs coming out of its mouth. Additional descriptions have the legs of an elephant coming out of the front and back of the Grootslang's serpent body. According to legend, the Grootslangs were one of the first creations of the gods. But the gods made a mistake. They made the Grootslangs too strong and smart. The Kishi is a two-faced creature from Angola, Africa. At first sight, a Kishi seems to look like an extremely handsome man with a charming personality that lures in any woman he meets. But what the women don't realize is that they are being drawn into a trap. Because on the back of a Kishi's head, there is another face that lies in wait. The face of a hyena that has unbreakable jaws.
And African mythology is rich, bubbling to the surface, and I hope you could see from those images how beautiful and cinematic they can be, and it can offer a little difference to some of the European depictions of these creatures and monsters. A different view of how magic and witchcraft can be told in stories. And you have loads of characters that are just not used correctly and underutilized. You've got Static Shock. You've got loads of stories of characters and black characters being underutilized. You've got Static Shock, which for the gods of me, I don't understand, hasn't been done right since its Cartoon Network series. You've got The Moon Prince, which is an amazing story that is ready to be told in cinema. You have got Egypt, aka Kemet, that has never been told correctly. Never. I don't know if they're fearful of addressing the truth and bringing it to light, but I do believe that when you tell fictional stories like this, it does more for the self-esteem of black communities and white communities to understand black stories and the lies that they have been fed. Kemet, aka Egypt, which is really Kemet, has never been done right in cinema, but we're here talking about a black James Bond. It just sometimes boggles the mind and it makes me feel like colonialization is deeper and more insidious in the psychology of society than anyone would really like you to believe. Before I say this and I move to the conclusion, I forgot to say this bit, but you have the Maroon War, the first Maroon War based off Danny Maroon, who was taken from the Ashanti tribe, now known as Ghana. There's so much to do there. You have the first Maroon War, which is a really interesting war to dissect and look into. Again,
Part 4, The First Maroon War. How a small group of Jamaican runaway slaves took on the British Empire and won. From 1728 to early 1740s, these rebels used their knowledge of the land and guerrilla warfare to outsmart and outfight a much larger British force. Imagine this, just 1,000 Maroons against a whopping 10,000 British troops, led by legendary warriors like Nanny of the Maroons, Cujo, and Quao. This wasn't just a battle, it was a cunning cat-and-mouse game through the dense Jamaican Blue Mountains. They fought for their freedom and secured peace treaties recognizing their independence, building a free society in the rugged interior, showing the power of unity and resilience. But there's a twist. The treaties they signed came with a condition, helping the British capture other runaway slaves. This decision divided the Maroon communities and strained their relationship with the rest of the enslaved population. What do you think about the Maroons' choice?
You've got gender, you've got race, you've got big action set pieces. Great black stories, whether they be African, whether they be Caribbean, whether they be the south of the Americas. There's great stories to be told, great folklore to be told, with the backdrop and interest of colonialization, race, diversity, multiculturalism, especially in the sense of the Caribbean folklore. There's so much to be told. I just don't want it to go to waste, and I don't want these debates about whether race should be a part of race swapping underpin these great stories that don't often get told enough. I think it's time. And the reason I think it's time is we've seen some examples of that. Like I've kept mentioning, The Woman King is an example of that, although it had its problematic aspects to it. You've got Spider-Man Into the Spideyverse, and you have Jordan Peele and his series, which are a bit more rustic and down to earth and more hard-hitting about their depiction of race relations. And you could do so many different stories, whether race is in the background, whether race is in the forefront, whether race is just the aesthetic of it, in the sense of Spider-Man Into the Spideyverse. There are so many great stories to be told. Please don't waste it on trying to turn iconic white characters into black characters, which could end up doing more harm to the black community or the community that you've race swapped into, or gender swapped into, or sexuality swapped into. That good. Ultimately, my biggest worry when it comes to these type of race swap, gender swap debates is that it can work as a form of colonialization. It sometimes robs the community of its great story, great lore, great mythology that it already has. And it kind of is an unfair environment, not only for the actors and directors, but for the community at large to spend time discussing whether race is important in a film like James Bond. You kind of rob them of their real cries of racism, oppression, systematic racism, when you kind of cheapen it to a race swap to a film, which inevitably would lead to bomb because it's so highly politicized. I don't want that for the film. I doubt it's actually going to happen in the end. It seems like Aaron Taylor Johnson, again, like I've mentioned, is the favorite. But you never know. The carpet can be pulled underneath you. I've seen it happen to me many times. However, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you understood where I was coming from. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. I can't wait to hear from you next week. By this point, I hope everyone in Britain's voted, and I'll see you next week.
Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships, because they knew death
was better than bondage.